Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's seminar. It is my pleasure to welcome Anna Lampadaridi to our seminar. She's a researcher at the CNRS, where she focuses on late antique and Byzantine hagiography. Her PhD explored the life of Porphyry of Gaza, which later became a monograph by the um, uh, Society des Baptistes in Brussels in 2016. These days, she's working on hagiographical texts that move between cultures, especially how Latin saints' lives were translated into Greek and the development of Italo-Greek hagiography, and how these texts were received and used within Byzantine liturgy. In this seminar, Anna will talk about Pankratios of Taormina in a paper titled Some Remarks on Pankratios of Taormina's Hagiographic Dossier, Exploring Texts and Occult Issues. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thanks once again for this invitation. It's a pleasure to to share part of my work with you today. So can I share my screen? Okay, that's not. Okay. So, Pankratios of Taormina was a legendary disciple of St. Peter, the first bishop of Taormina, martyr and saint. His hagiographic dossier remains underexplored compared to other Sicilian martyrs. So today I will present an overview of his hagiographic dossier, focusing on cult aspects and also referring to relative evidence that can be found in other sources. So this is very much a work in progress in view of publication, and I'm very much looking forward to receiving feedback. So before that, a quick reminder of Byzantine Sicily. So located at the heart of the Mediterranean, Sicily was an essential crossroad of the Roman Empire, but by the early Middle Ages, after the collapse of the imperial Mare Nostrum, it had become a frontier province, the bulwark of the Byzantine Empire in the central Mediterranean. As such, it was a highly contested zone where various policies vied for political, religious, and cultural supremacy. Brought under the rule of Constantinople in the 6th century, since Justinian's conquest in 565, and will remain part of the Byzantine Empire for 4 centuries. The island was the main Byzantine stronghold in the west against the Lombards, who controlled most of the mainland Italy, and the Muslim Arabs, who had conquered North Africa by the end of the 7th century. During the 6th and 7th centuries, the island maintains its prosperity, and in the 7th century, it becomes a safe haven from Roman elites threatened by the Lombard invasion, as well as for Oriental monks driven off by the Persian conquest. In the 7th century, Sicily becomes once again a center of Hellenism. Many Greek popes of the 7th and 8th centuries actually come from Sicily and are born from parents who have emigrated from the east. Eager to reinforce their control over the rich island, the emperors transferred in the 8th century the ecclesiastical jurisdiction over the island from the Pope to the Patriarch of Constantinople. So Byzantine emperors and popes competed for political and religious influence over the island, where the latter had traditionally been dominant through their extensive land holdings and ecclesiastical rights. Sicily enjoyed exceptional prosperity during the economic downturn of the Dark Ages, thanks to the insularity, which offered a degree of protection against invaders. This relative safety made the island a safe zone for many high-profile aristocrats and literati, who furthermore found in Sicily a local society already well known for its cultural achievements. The background helps to understand the striking number of literary texts produced in from the 7th to 9th centuries. The lion's share of this production was hagiographical in nature, with text mainly centered on the figure of local bishops. This episcopal hagiography abruptly came to an end around the middle of the 9th century, concurrently with the decisive steps of the Muslim conquest, even if the context was ripe with opportunities to stage heroic churchmen resisting the invaders. This is the historical framework of the Sicilian so legendary hagiographical production, which suddenly ceases in the middle of the 9th century, as I said, when Muslim invaders gain ground. So let's start with life Berger 1410. The hagiographical tradition surrounding Pankratios is preserved primarily in a Greek Vita, which is a vivid hagiographic novel with strong local connections, recounting in over 100 folios the evangelization of Taormina by its first bishop, a Greek hagiographical text, so belonging to the Italo-Greek hagiography. This literary production, so Italo-Greek hagiography, ranging from the oldest passions of the 5th to the lives of the 13th century, concerns saints of Sicily and southern Italy. Composed between the 8th and the beginning of the 9th century, the life of Pankratios is one of the most extraordinary hagiographical texts produced in Byzantine Sicily, a geographical novel, good and proper, typical of the Italo-Greek literary production of this period, which is characterized by a strong component of the marvelous. It offers a striking example of a geographical novel. As Evelyn Patlajan has shown, such texts contain a wealth of ideological and cultural motifs, even if the historical facts they purport to recount are not always easy to identify. The analysis of the narrative structures can shed light on some of the characteristics of this literature. For instance, concerning the oldest text in the material form, the figure of the demon is hardly even found. The life of Pankratios provides a good case study for the use of hagiographical topoi, such as the anti-Jewish attitude, the legendary motif of the apostolic origins of the Sicilian dioceses, the prevention of tempests, the urban dimension, and although clothed in popular linguistic garment, it has been argued that the text possesses unusual lexical liveness, such as frequent use of neologism and a wide variety of syntactic solutions. We are also dealing with a wealth of information on the history of the image in Byzantium, ranging from its relationship with the viewer to its manufacture, its subjects and their artistic models. So a certain Evagrios, the faithful companion of Pankratios and his successor to the See of Taormina, presents himself as the author of this pseudepigraphical text, which has been dated between the early 8th and the early 9th century, so before 815. This polyphonic narrative includes episodes that the saint's disciple could not have witnessed, and behind the pseudo-Evagrios lies an author who knows much more than the saint's assistant. So most likely written by an Italo-Greek, the life of Pankratios is imbued with a strong local flavor. So to begin with, let's briefly summarize its plot. The action of the narrative is set in the apostolic age, in the time of Apostle Peter, but the text is full of digressions illustrating an even remoter past. The Apostle Peter meets Pankratios in his native village near Antioch. After having ordained Maximus bishop of the city, the apostle invites a painter named Joseph who makes an icon of Christ as well as portraits of Pankratios and Peter. He also illustrates a painter's manual with scenes from the life of Christ. They are to be part of the iconographic program applied in church as suggested by the apostle. Pankratios follows Peter to the city of Antioch, where they meet Markianos, also sent there by the apostles. From this point, the road novel begins. On the recommendations of the apostle Paul, Pankratios and Markianos are sent to the west in order to evangelize it. They get on the boat to Sicily, Pankratios to Taormina, and Markianos to Syracuse. The captains of the vessel embrace the Christian faith and become their companions. The narrative then focuses on Pankratios' action after his arrival in Taormina. Endowed with the icons that the Apostle Peter has given him, he immediately engages in the fight against pagan cults, starting with the temple of the god Falcon. Bonifatius, the local governor, gradually becomes his ally. A riot breaks out between Pankratios and the pagan priests. More pagan temples are destroyed, among them the one of the god Lyson. The local population, including erudite men such as the philosophos Xanthippos, is converted to Christianity. The temple of the god Falcon, said to represent one of Taormina's oldest cults, is thrown into the sea by crows. This is followed by clashes with the pagan priests, leading to the destruction of other temples dedicated to idols, notably that of the god Lyson, whose sacred serpent is also thrown into the sea. So, after having planted the temples of the idols, Pankratios asks Bonifatius to build a church, chooses a position for it, and the work begins. Pankratios consecrates the finished church and serves a liturgy there. So there is a dedication feast after the service. Now we can just see the text. So I will read the English translation by Salman Pakiti. So, my child, I also want a sanctuary to be built for me so that I can celebrate the divine mystagogy in it. Bonifatius, after hearing all this from San Pankratios, fell at his feet and said, Reverend Father and true servant of Jesus Christ, if you make a request of your servant, I am ready for obedience. I ask you then, Reverend Father, to indicate to us your choice of location and the method we ought to use in building it. The saint then immediately took Lycaonidis and Bonifatius with him, and they went down to the highest point of the city, and he pointed out to them the location of the oratory, saying to them, I want it to be built in this location. The location was facing the sea to the east, and it was next to the wall. Bonifatius took slaves and diggers and laid the foundations in accordance with San Pankratius' indications. Then San Pankratius stood and said a prayer according to the tradition of St. Peter the Apostle, and after he had carried out the fixture of the cross, he left and went up to the praetorium, and no one in the city knew the secret except for Bonifatius and Lycaonidis and the sailors whom the apostle had baptized. When he had eaten some food, Lycaonidis left, taking one of the praetorium stewards with him, and went down to the brickmakers and said to them, The governor, illustrious consul and founder, has given orders that you are to make bricks and fire for the building purposes, because he wants to build a repository for clothing. The brickmakers immediately took clay and made bricks and fired them. Then Bonifatius himself sent his slaves out, and they collected stones which had been burnt, porous volcanic ones, because the sanctuary barrier of the oratory had a lightweight span, and the work was completed with great enthusiasm within 30 days, and the sanctuary was finished in agreeable mosaic work. So Pankratios also faces Jews and Montanists while accomplishing miraculous healings, some of them concerning members of the upper class. He blesses the troops guided by Bonifatius who go off to war and doubt the icon of Christ. In the meantime, Elidos, the new governor of the city, a follower of the god Scamandros, falls in love with a virgin devoted to Christ. The episode ends with the martyrdom of two diaconesses. Bonifatius and his men return triumphant. The prisoners of war are baptized. Elidos is killed while turning into a dragon. Pankratius and his companions travel around the surrounding provinces and consecrate churches. Xanthippos, who receives the name Epaphroditos after his baptism, is ordained priest and riding on his donkey goes to a province close to Syracuse in order to spread Christianity. He baptized many peasants. When Marcianos learns this, he considers that Epaphroditos' mission encroaches on his prerogative and writes an epistle to Pankratios. After a short letter exchange between the two bishops, Marcianos finally supports Epaphroditos and recounts his trouble to Pankratios. His fight against pagan cults, for instance those of Apollo and Artemis, and the hostile attitude of the local governors, Epaphroditos, accompanied by Evagrios and Marcianos, go to Pankratios with Pankratios to Syracuse. But Pankratios has a premonition of the imminent attack of Achillenos, king of Calabria, and goes back to Taormina. This war triggers a long digression on the foundation of the city of Taormina by Tauros and Menia, and the long-standing conflict between Remaldos and the king of Calabria, Achillenos. Pankratios and his companions climb on the walls of Taormina, holding the cross and the icons. The enemy retreats and is converted to Christianity. Pankratios sets off to Calabria with a mission to evangelize it. Maximus, the bishop of Pankratios' native village, travels to Sicily to find Pankratios. While Evagrios and Bonifatius are away, the pagan Artagaros, at the head of the praetorium, plots against Pankratios, who is notified through a premonitory vision. Thrown into a crevice, the bishop is assaulted and battered by Artagaros' men. The bishop draws his last breath, and his companions find his corpse and bring it back to the city. A servant who has witnessed the murder denounced the criminals and meet their death. Pankratios asks Evagrios in a vision to put his corpse in a more humble coffin. It is placed in his martyrium, decorated with icons, and accomplishes miracles. So that's the last chapters. So then the artisans began, and Bonifatius came, and we looked over the area from the crevice to the sandstone, and after taking measurements, the builders and the diggers took over, and when they had built foundations over the space, I performed the rite of fixing the cross, and they began the building. So it's Evagrius talking. When the church was completed, I made a porch and small rooms. I made a reception room too for the use of those who frequented San Pancratius' precious temple, and every aspect of the building of the church was completed by the grace of Christ our God. And when a year's time had passed, I decorated the whole church with scenes from the Old Testament, from the time when the Lord God made heaven and earth and the sea and everything in them according to the book of Genesis, up to the final acts of creation. On the other side, I put scenes from the New Testament. Then I made a representation of my Lord Pankratius' face on an icon, which was an exact likeness. When I look at his precious face on the icon, I think that I am conversing with him in the flesh, and I can see him. And the end of at the end of the life, the last chapter, San Pancratius' tomb produced many and innumerable miracles, healing all sorts of diseases and driving out demons by the grace of Jesus Christ, our true God. If we were to write them down individually, there would not be sufficient room in 4 books to put them. We recorded these as far as we were able, to the extent we had space, to the glory of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, the true and uncompounded Trinity, now and ever and to the ages of ages. Amen. So the life of Pankratios, entered the church history in 1657, when the Jesuit Ottavio Gaetani published a summary of the life in the Vita Sanctorum Saeculorum. Discouraged due to the length of the life, he had actually given up the publication of the Latin translation of the entire life, that his confrère fellow, Père Sirmont, had already prepared. So since the 17th century, the important length of the life, around 100 manuscript folios, so more than 300 printed pages, has disheartened scholars. In the second half of the 19th century, Alexander Veselovsky published a lengthy summary, which gave rise to a number of articles. However, the text of the life remained inaccessible, so it was not until the 1980s that the first critical edition of the text saw the light of day, albeit in a limited context. As part of her PhD thesis defended at the University of Oxford in 1986, Cynthia Stallman-Pakiti produced the first critical edition of the recension A of The Life of Pancras. So there are 3 recensions of the life. The second recension represents an abbreviation, a stylistic improvement of the first one, and it appears to have been restricted to Mount Athos and must have been produced by 1023. Which is the date of the earliest manuscript. And the third recension survives in a single manuscript. According to Stallman, it is related to South Italian tradition and Italo-Greek circles, and is probably descended from a manuscript of the first branch of the first recension. So Stallman provided the first critical edition of the first recension of the life. However, the vicissitudes of human life and the researcher's ultimately death meant that this thesis did not lead to immediate publication. The critical text of the first recension of the life, established by Stallman, accompanied by an English translation and commentary, was finally published only 8 years ago, in 2018, as a posthumous work. Unfortunately, this major publication has not undergone appropriate revision and update, and a lot of work remains to be done concerning the overall hagiographic dossier of Pankratios, especially regarding also cult issues. So the Vita offers some of the most striking examples of devotion to icons. It certainly does not come as a surprise that the foremost champions of the iconophile party in Constantinople, like the monk reformer Theodore Stodite or the Patriarch Nikephoros, owned copies of the life and quoted from the text. In his Epistula 386, which Stallman Pakiti dates to 814 and Fatouros to 816, 817, Theodore questions the authenticity of the hagiographic legend of Pancras without making it clear whether he had access to the entire text or only part of it. Theodore refers to San Pankratios on two other occasions, this time with a more direct connection to the text of the life, which he must have had before him. In letters 221 and 532, Theodore comments on the passage in the life concerning the decoration of the little tower, the Pyrgiskos, by the painter Joseph, on the demand of the Apostle Peter. We are dealing with a pivotal moment in the life, which occupies a privileged place in the Nachleben of the legend. In the works of Nikephoros, references to the life are frequent. In his Refutatio and Reversio, written in 820, Nikephoros mentions the life among the books destroyed by the iconoclast. This means that the manuscript containing the life, which Nikephoros describes as very ancient, Archeotate Deuse, had reached Constantinople before 820. More specifically, this iconoclastic program may well date back to the first phase of the crisis, as 730, 787, as Sylvia Stallman suggests, which would mean that the text was in the hands of the iconoclast before 787 and could imply an early date. So the life has been interpreted with varying degrees of nuance as a iconophile pamphlet. Evelyn Patlajan interpreted the text as an attempt to defend the apostolic origins of the See of Taormina in the context of Sicily's transfer from the jurisdiction of Rome to that of Constantinople. Ugo Giannetti and Michael van Esbroek saw in the current form of the life a later reworking followed by the victory of iconoclasm, but prior to year 815, of a text dating from the late 7th or early 8th century. And Augusta Concialongo interpreted the destruction of pagan idols as iconodule propaganda against the accusation of idolatry launched by the iconoclasts. On the other hand, the mention of the life in the iconodule anthology of the Parisinus Graecus 1115, likely dating from the mid-8th century and assembled in Rome, imposes a different terminus ante quem for its dating. Alexander Alexakis dating this compilation around the year 770. However, the iconoclastic crisis is never mentioned directly, and the life does not exhibit a clear iconoclast agenda. Cynthia Stallman Pakiti has gathered a series of strong arguments that plead for an early dating of the life. In fact, the iconophile episodes are but isolated tassels in a very long text and are never written in a polemical tone. So the text could also mirror the kind of candid iconophilia typical of the period immediately anterior to the onset of the iconoclasm, and against which this heresy ultimately reacted. Evagrius now, the saint's disciple, his companion and successor in the episcopal see of Taormina, purports to be the author of the text. Evagrius is not mentioned in any other source. There is no evidence that this Evagrius was the bishop of Taormina, and no bishops of that name are recorded in Taormina. According to Deleuze, an Evagrius of Sitiana in the Martyrologium Hieronymianum for 3rd April derives from a marginal addition related to St. Pankratios. But Lajan argued that Evagrius took this pseudonym from the liturgical calendar due to the varial lex on Sicilia instead of Siciana in the Martyrologium Hieronymianum on April the 3rd. So this fictitious character functions as a literary mask of the real author of the text. Although he pretends to be a native of Pontus, his knowledge of the geography of the Christian East is rough. The fact that Evagrius does not seem to have a background in the East also indicates that he was not among the refugees from the East who used Sicily as a common destination or a transit post as early as the 7th century. On the other hand, Evagrius is well acquainted with local realities, which argues for a Sicilian or Italo-Greek origin of the author. As we will see, the general impression that stems from the narrative is confirmed by a first-hand knowledge of geographical terms, toponyms, or details related to the local context. So one of the main sources of the life is directly linked to the figure of Pseudo-Evagrius and the concept of pseudepigraphal narrative. This literary persona of the author is largely so based on the figure of Pseudo-Prochorus, author of the Acts of John, dated to the 5th century according to the editor, genaut.univie.ac.at, which constitute the principal source to which the author of the life turns in, reconstructing the apostolic age. So, drawing inspiration from the Act of John by Prochorus, another pseudepigraphical account, the author of the life claimed his place within the literary tradition of pseudo-apostolic hagiographic narratives, such as the life of Heraclides, the first bishop of Tamassos, and the life of Oxybius, who is presented as the founder of the Church of Soloi. These two hagiographic texts, composed between the late 5th and the first half of the 7th century to defend the apostolic origin of the Church of Cyprus, draw extensively on the Acts of Barnabas by Pseudo-Mark, generally dated to the mid-5th century. So this is therefore a literary context that provides a further argument for an early dating of the life. And in the case of the life, the account of Pseudo-Prochorus has been drawn upon more extensively than previously thought. So the apostolic work as depicted in the life is largely modeled on another pseudepigraphical work, the Acts of John by Prochorus. The similarities between the two accounts are numerous. They relate to the adoption of the same general narrative framework, analogous literary motifs that are frequently revisited, the highly fictional nature of the narrative, the insular setting, the sea voyage, and the depiction of robust pagan cults deeply rooted in the region are the main points of similarity between the two texts. So, despite the obscure identity of each author, the image of the world of the apostles conveyed by the life inspired another hagiographic account that purports to reconstruct the same era, the life of the apostle Andrew by Epiphanius of Constantinople, written in the mid-9th century. The struggle against paganism with the depiction of demons in the form of ravens during the destruction of the statue of Artemis, the presence of dragons, the role of the image, and in particular an iconographic program intended for churches, largely echoes the life, with Epiphanius explicitly cites as one of his sources. So Pseudo-Evagrius' work did not go unheeded, since his depiction of the apostolic age inspired later accounts of the same kind, which is so indicative of a certain degree of success. So let's take a look on other sources on providing evidence on Pankratios. The Martyrologium Hieronymianum, so the earliest surviving mention of Pankratios of Taormina, appears in the 6th-7th century recension of the Latin Martyrologium Hieronymianum, as transmitted in 8th century manuscripts. This is the oldest extensive martyrology of the Latin West, listing the feast days of the saints for the entire calendar year, generally also specifying where their feasts are held. So on the 8th of July, the three earliest manuscripts, and you can see here, record the commemoration in Sicily of Pankratios, well, Pancranus or Pankratus or Prakratus, so who could be identified as Pankratios of Taormina. The existence of Pankratios cult in Sicily is first attested by Gregory the Great. So in Gregory's Register, a collection of some 854 letters of as Pope. The original copy survived in the 9th century, but were subsequently lost. And from the late 8th century onwards, because of the exceptional nature that Gregory had by then attained, various collections were assembled from the original copies. So for the cult of saints, there is much that is of interest in the letters. In a papal letter of 591 to Felix, Bishop of Messina, Gregory refers to the foundation of a basilica dedicated to Stephen, the first martyr, Pankratios, Bishop and Martyr of Taormina, and Euplus, Martyr of Catania in Messina, Sicily, and to the provision of contact relics. The term used is sanctuaria. The description of the process required for the building and provision of the church is formulaic and appears in several other letters. So this provides a clear account of the procedure of providing a foundation dedicated to a saint. The Saint Pankratios mentioned is presumably so Pankratios of Taormina, since the city is very close to Messina, and this city is very close to Messina, and plus is another Sicilian saint. But it is possible that Pankratios of Rome is the saint referred to. But if the saint mentioned is actually Pankratios of Taormina, this is a key piece of evidence from the early cult of Pankratios that attests its veneration in eastern Sicily by the end of the 6th century and predates the full hagiographic tradition. So just read the English translation. Januarius, deacon of the Church of Messina, has informed us in the notification of a petition, which appears in an appendix, that as a mark of his own devotion he has founded a basilica in the city of Messina, which he wants to be consecrated in honor of Saint Stephen, Pankratios, and Euplus. For that reason, my dearest brother, if this place legally belongs to your city, and is certain that no corpse is buried there, first of all receive the legitimate donation, and is to say from today 10 gold coins a year free for imperial tribute, and from the rest of his property let him retain the usufruct. So another reference to the church of St. Pankratios at Taormina. So we know that at the beginning of the 9th century there was a large sanctuary in Taormina dedicated to St. Pankratios. Theodore the Studite, I have already talked about him, refers to a Naos Megistos in one of his letters, so it's Epistula 386, dated to 814, according to Faturos, so the most recent editor of his correspondence. The encomium of St. Pankratios by Gregory the Pagurite, which was also edited by Stalman Pakiti, we have no evidence regarding its author beyond the internal evidence supplied by the encomium. The title of the work declares Gregory to have been a monk of the monastery to Paguriou in Constantinople, and we do not know much of its exact location in Constantinople. Despite the first Constantinopolitan connection of the encomias, the text must have been declaimed in Sicily rather than Constantinople. All manuscripts are Italo-Greek, presumably suggesting that the text did not circulate beyond the immediate locality of its production, and most of the narrative details are derived from the extensive life of Pankratios. According to its editor, Stalman Pakiti, Gregory must have been a Constantinopolitan monk who fled to the safety to the provinces in Sicily, and his encomium can be dated to the second decade of the 9th century. One of the few details which are independent of any extant literary sources is the statement that Gregory identifies the church founded by St. Pankratios after the destruction of the pagan called Falcons and Lison with a contemporary church of St. Lawrence. So he cleansed the city, which was given over to idols from idolatry, and filled it with the knowledge of God. For after he had plundered the temples of the idols, considering them useless, he built a house of prayer and established an altar to the Lord, and at which all of those hastening towards faith in Christ received the laver of incorruption and the hand of the saint and took the holy chrism. The name of this building was later changed to the Church of St. Lawrence. So in the life of St. Pankratios, we already read the passages. The saint founds a church, but the change of the name is not recorded. So this information provided by the author of the encomium attests it's his first-hand knowledge of the city. As we've seen in the Vita, the church built by St. Pankratios facing the sea to the east and next to the wall does not correspond with the present church of St. Pancratio outside the Messina gate, but could be identified with the Church of San Pietro and Paolo on the Via Pirandello, according to Stallman. According to Muscolino, the church dates from the 13th, 15th centuries, but could have been built on a previous construction. And according to this author, in this area associated to pagan cults was found the convent of Santa Maria di Gesù in the 13th century, next to which there was the Chiesa di San Lorenzo, so oikos to Agiu Lavrediu, who could have been initially been the church built by San Pankratios. And according to Gaetani, the Saracens destroyed this edifice. So in any case, despite these doubts, there is evidence attesting an important sanctuary of San Pankratios, so in Taormina. More evidence comes from the canon to San Pankratios by Elias the hymnographer, edited by Conce Alonco, of Sicilian provenance. It has been given a probable date between 843 and 902, according to Stallman Pachiti, second half of the 8th, first half of the 9th century, according to Mario Re. It is based on the life of Pankratios and has textual affinity with two manuscripts of Italo-Greek origin. It dwells on many details drawn on the Vita. However, while it alludes to the destruction of the idols, it does not explicitly name them. And as in the accounts of the Synaxarion, we'll talk about them later, there is no mention in it of the legend of the city founders. Instead, the role of icon is emphasized, a theme that is predominant on the work of Pseudo Evagrius and is also present in the panegyric of Gregory the Pagorite. Finally, in the canon, the martyr is repeatedly described as a shepherd, poimen, a central term, as that is also present in Philagathos' sermon. We'll talk about it later, and also present in the life of Pankratios and in the Gomi of Gregory the Pagorite. So more evidence concerning the relic of St. Pancras of Taormina. So we know that the relic of St. Pankratios was a place of pilgrimage in the late 9th or early 10th century. In the life of Elias the Younger, we read that this monk visited the tomb of Pankratios in the late 9th or the early 10th century, before 902. 92, the year in which Taormina fell to the Arabs. In this episode, Elian foretells the capture of the city by the Arabs. And finally, the Synaxarion of Constantinople. So the legend of Pankratios is narrated in various strata of the Synaxarion of Constantinople. In the most ancient family of this major liturgical book, Recension Ash, according to Deleuze edition, dating back to the time of Constantine Porphyrogenitos, so mid-10th century, we found just a short mention of the feast of Pankratios on February the 9th, along with Marcellos, another Sicilian bishop, and Philagrius, a Cypriot bishop. So the text of Recension Ash remains unpublished, and you have here the mention. Θεαυτή μέρα μνέμε του Οσίου Μαρκέλου και Χαϊφυλαγρίου Επισκόπου της Κύπρου, καί Παγκρατίου Επισκόπου Ταυρομενίου. The existence of this mention in the most ancient strata of the Synaxario offers important evidence of his cult in Constantinople, which is attested at least by the 10th century. The same mention is present in the Typicon transmitted by the Patmos manuscript, that also offers important evidence of his cult in Constantinople. And in the entry of the Recension S of the Synaxarion, dated to 12th, 13th century, for February 9th, the part of referring to Pankratios is more developed. As you can see here, all three bishops are referred to as disciples of the Apostle Peter. And the same entry occurs at the Menologium of Basil II, with the famous miniature depicting the three bishops. So Recension S of the Synaxarion contains a more extensive entry exclusively dedicated to Pankratios of Taormina on July the 9th, starting with the baptism of Pankratios and his parents in Jerusalem. After their death, Pankratios retired in a cave, not in the so-called Little Tower, the Pyrgiskos, as mentioned in his life. The Synaxarist describes the encounter with the Apostle Peter and his journey to Sicily, along with Marcellos. Special attention is paid to the destruction of pagan temples, the consecration of a church within 30 days, and conversions and baptism. So the entry closes with the death of Pankratios caused by Artagoras, who was at the head of Montanism. and a shorter entry is preserved in his section CG, which is of Italo-Greek origin. And interestingly enough, on July the 6th, the Synaxarion records the memory of two virgins who were rescued by Pankratios, Eusebia and Susanna, referred to as Pankratios' disciples. And so on one last piece of evidence comes from the encomium of St. Pankratios by Philagathos Keramevs. During the Norman conquest of Sicily, the cult of Pancras experienced a revival. In the 12th century, Philagathos Keramevs composed a panegyric in honor of the saint, alluding to the celebration of his feast days, so July the 9th, in Taormina, and the veneration of his relics. The text has recently been examined and analyzed by Mario Re. As the scholar points out, Philagathos' encomium provides further evidence of the success and renown that characterized the work of Pseudo-Evagrius some 3 centuries after its composition. Certainly, the perspective of the Italo-Greek homilist is different, just as the rules governing the two different types of text differ. Philagathos aims to reconstruct for catechetical purposes and to edify his audience an ideal journey of the soul that gradually detaches himself from evil to reach the perfect good. And like in other works of the same author, the biblical exegesis occupies the major part of the text and is followed by a shorter section devoted to the memory of the martyr. So St. Pancras, therefore, as noted by Evagrius, who recounted his life, came from the east, and after being consecrated bishop by the hands of the leader of the apostles, he was sent to the island of Aurs. Having come to the city of Taro and Menia, he first eradicated the abominable idolatry of the demons and demolished the impious statues. Among these, those of Falcon, Lyson, and Scamandros were particularly venerated. He then led the city's governor Boniface to conversion, commissioning the construction of divine temples and sacred dwellings. And after having converted many to the true faith, he sealed his end with martyrdom. And in this too, he emulated his Lord. His bishop's stole stained red and blood shed during his martyrdom. He ascended to heaven, lifted up by the hands of angels. Mario Re points out that Philagathos could have drawn on a synaxary entry close to that including of the Italo-Greek Synaxarion Serge, whereas in the entry of the Synaxarion S, Pankratios is told to have built one church during 30 days. The author of the entry of the Italo-Greek recension of the Synaxarion refers to the foundation of many churches. Since silence regarding icons come as no surprise, given that by the time of Philagathos lived, some 3 centuries had passed since the end of the iconoclastic controversy. And Mario Repo also points out that the author draws probably from the canon composed by Elias the hymnographer and transmitted in Italo-Greek manuscripts. And he focuses on the expression to trimeres tes psychis in the first ode of the canon and not attested in any other source regarding Pankratios. And just one last point, the Georgian life of Pankratios, which was edited as a whole in the beginning of the 20th century by Kakhanov on the basis of 2 Athonite manuscripts, but his edition received very little scholarly attention. The Georgian text was composed in Mount Athos by the famous translator Euthymius the Hagiorite, and it is included in the list of the translations made by Euthymius drawn up by George the Hagiorite. Pankratios is Bakrat in Georgian, and the text was translated in Georgian in the honor of the founder of the dynasty of Bagratides. So the Georgian version was edited well before the original Greek text, thanks to the homonymy between Pankratios and the founder of the dynasty. So it would be interesting to look into the Georgian life for more evidence. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for that fascinating paper, Anna. Thank you. As you can see, loads of appreciation in if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or write it down in the chat. Um, Dan, do I see you? Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this remarkable overview of the whole tradition on Pankratius. Thank you very much. It's extremely informative and very interesting. You mentioned I'm curious about the thing. It was interesting to hear that at the end of a long narrative, Evagrius, the author, is self-aware about the length of the book and threatens the readers with three more volumes if needs be. But yeah, that was very interesting to see an awareness of size. One way or another, the fact that he says I could have written four has to do with the fact that he's aware that this is a long, and it is a long in the whole corpus in the project that we're working on. Yeah, this is one of the longest. You mentioned that Stallman Paciti edited the first recension of the text. Could you tell us a bit more about the other recensions? For instance, I'm interested, which recension would you have chosen to edit if you were to edit that? Or now that we have an edition of the first recension, is there any of the others that it's different enough that you would recommend publication? I'm curious how you see this.
Yes, to be honest, I have not looked into the manuscripts. Actually, the text is very, very long, and they are not, yes, from what I've seen, there are not major discrepancies, differences. So, I don't know if it is worth, like.
Do another edition of
But
the same
so
thing.
I just, Stallman says that the second recension, so it's kind of an abrégé, an abbreviation, stylistic improvement of the first recension, which is what is interesting is the restriction, the association to Mount Athos, produced by 1023, which is the date of the earliest manuscript. So it would be interesting maybe to look in relation to the Georgian version, but from someone who knows Georgian. I'm not unfortunately in the position to do it. And the third reception, she says that it is related to South Italian tradition and Italo-Greek circles, and it is linked. It's descended from a manuscript of the first branch of the first reception. So the other two recensions they descend from the first recension, which is the most important. So yes, of course, if someone is interested, that could be always of interest to look into the other two, but I don't know if that will change
Yeah.
things to our. I mean, the text is very, very long, so that's quite a discussion.
We've noticed. You
Yes.
you also mentioned that the recent publication of the edition in Australian one, the text went unrevised into it in some respects.
Yes.
What sort of problems are with that text? Like if it would have been revised properly, what sort of revisions would have needed? I'm just a curiosity of mine.
Yeah. Well, there is one more Greek manuscript transmitting the first reception. Well, it's a fragmentary manuscript that would not have radically changed the apparatus criticus, but this could have been an addition.
Yeah.
The Greek text is sometimes it's a little bit problematic. And the introduction, well, there is no recent bibliography on Sicily. That's the basic problem, that there was no update for the bibliography. But Stallman arguments regarding the dating of the text that I mentioned, they're very strong and it remains, a major work. But I think it's a pity that it has not been updated regarding to recent secondary bibliography and maybe better revision of the Greek text. And there is no reference to the to Pankratios cult. So I mean, yeah, that was I was trying to explain at the beginning that it is interesting to make like an overview of all the evidence. It's as it is not present in the volume. But it remains, we are very happy to have this critical edition, which was until now accessible only through the PhD, the DPhil of Stallman.
Very interesting. So basically, it could have used revisions in all respects. Thank you. Very interesting.
Yes, but it is an enormous project, so it's difficult, I mean, to criticize, and the context was very difficult because she died,
Yes, yes.
and she couldn't have done this, and other people just were in charge of this publication, so it's like complicated. But we're happy to have a critical edition to work on.
Yes, that's true. Thank you.
If I may, I'd like to jump in with a question. So my question is about, so you mentioned Evagris's text and how the icons and the images play such an important role in it. I was wondering if the significance given to the icon of the icons that you mentioned is something that you find in the other texts as well. A second part to this is you mentioned that Pankratios is in this text. Pankratios is said to have um, um, he came to Sicily with icons. Did he also transfer the manual that Joseph the Painter compiled? Is there a sense of that being transferred to Sicily as well?
Yes, thank you very much. So, regarding evidence on icons in the other pieces of the Hagiographic Dossier, yes, there are some references. It's a well in the in life 1410. It is like a basic motif, and then in other pieces such as the encomium of by Gregory the Pagurite, there is some evidence on icons. In the canon of by Elias the hymnographer too. In the Synaxarion, just yes, the Synaxarion may be a little bit less, and as I mentioned in the encomium by Philagathos Kerameps, which is 12th century, there is no mention of the icons because we're far away from the iconoclastic crisis, and it's not. I think it's no longer of interest. So it's interesting to follow this theme. And in the life of the Apostle Andrew by Epiphanius of Constantinople, there is also mention of icons, which has been inspired by the life of Pankratios. And to answer to the second question, yes, there is also the manual, the painter's manual, which is very interesting for art historians. And Pankratios uses that as a model when he consecrates churches and he decorates. He's in charge of the decoration. So it's kind of yes, a manual, a painter's manual. So it's yes, interesting.
Thank you. That's actually absolutely fascinating. So is this the church that Pancratius, sorry for the follow-up. So is the church that Pancratius is said to have built and decorated, is that the one outside Messina Gate? No.
No,
Do,
no. I mean, yes, I tried to explain a little bit. It's very problematic because uh, well, in the so let me find the Yes, in the Vita, so according to the Pseudo-Agrarios, we read that the church built by San Pankratios was facing the sea to the east and was next to the wall, and that does not correspond with the present church of San Pancrazio outside the Messina gate. Stallman identifies the church founded by Pancratius with the church of San Pietro and Paolo on the Via Pirandello. And then Muscolino, so more recent bibliography, says that this church dates from the 13th, 15th century, but could have been built on a previous construction. And in this area associated to pagan cult was found the convent Santa Maria de Jesus in the 13th century, next to which there was the Chiesa di San Lorenzo, oikos to Agiu Lavrediu, which could have initially been the church built by San Pancratius, because in the encomium by Gregory the Pagorite, we read that the name of this building was later changed to the Church of San Lawrence. So the church founded by Pancratius could have been renamed and actually be identified with the Church of San Lawrence. That could have been a possibility. I have to cross-check reference with archaeological evidence. So yes, it's not very clear, but in any case, it cannot be identified with the actual church, the present church of the San Pancrazio outside the Messina gate.
Thank you so much. It is absolutely fascinating to think about the different possibilities of churches, and if at all we're able to identify which one, then to see what was in Joseph's manual, because I assume the text itself or the manual itself, the manuscript of it has not survived. Is that,
No.
yeah, oh, yes. Okay. If I may, I have another question. It's about the cult. Um, Not in Sicily, but in Constantinople that we see later. Are we able to trace what the origins of that transfer, can we call it a transfer, and what could potentially be the origins of that cult in Constantinople, perhaps the reasons or the objects or the people perhaps who could have fostered that cult?
Uh, yeah, so there is evidence. I mean, the major piece is the Synaxarion of Constantinople for evidence of his cult in Constantinople. So I mentioned that in the most ancient strata version, which dates back to Constantine Porphyrogenito, so mid-3rd century, there is just a mention about Pancratius, no, not a full entry. Um, and it is also interesting to note that in the most ancient version of the Synaxarion, there are entries concerning Sicilian martyrs like Agatha, like Lucia, like Euplus. So there was an interest in Sicily, um, which was also associated to the political context, to the efforts to reconquest Sicily, which is no longer Byzantine at that time. But I think there was basically an interest for martyrs. Well, Pancratius was also a martyr, but in the Synaxarion of Constantinople, he's referred to as a bishop, and his life is legendary. So there was basically more interest about martyrs like Agatha, Lucia, or Euplus, which really go back to whose hagiographic dossier goes back to the first Christian centuries, and I think that the cult of Pancratius was more established in Constantinople a little bit later on, maybe 11th century. But the presence in the mention in the most ancient strata version of the Synaxarion And the typicon transmitted by the Patmos manuscript is important, and it is revealing of the interest of the emperors too, of Porphyrogenitus for Sicily, and the connections between the Sicilian also community in Constantinople. So there were, yes, also, just groups of people interested in this skull, and there was also political interest, I think.
Thank you for that. This has been a very enlightening paper, Anna, and discussion. Thank you very much for taking out the time. We are at 11 and wouldn't want to keep you for longer. Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you for this wonderful overview of the material we have on Pankratios and what we can do with it. And there's so much to talk about, but thank you for allowing us to record this because a few of our regular audience members were not able to be with us today. So this goes out and hopefully we can keep this conversation going.
Yeah.
In different ways. But thank you so much for taking out the time, Anna. And to our audience, thank you very much. We hope to see you next month for our next paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and yes, looking forward to keeping in touch, and thank you.